I know that exile is a difficult life for any free man, but I am confident that you recognize that you hold a position of responsibility.
This is President John F. Kennedy in December of 1962 at a welcome back ceremony for a group of men known as the Brigade 2506, which was a CIA-sponsored militia of Cuban exiles formed to overthrow Fidel Castro. Following the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, the members of the brigade were taken prisoner for 250 days, only being released to Miami after a ransom of $53 million worth of food and medical equipment was negotiated between the United States and Cuba. 55 years later, Luis Elizondo, the son of one of those men, is seated at his desk on the 5th floor of the Pentagon. Throughout Lou's career with the United States military, he has traveled the world overseeing intelligence operations and even working for Camp 7, which is the most secure facility at Guantanamo Bay. He has, in his own words, dealt with a lot of stuff, like coup d'etats, black market terrorism, and violent drug cartels. Somehow, though, this may be his most difficult mission yet. No doubt with the words President Kennedy addressed to his father echoing in his head, Lou is writing a resignation letter to his boss, the Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis. Now, quitting your job is never easy, and it's even harder when your reasoning is that nobody will take you seriously when you say that aliens are real, bro. Yet that's exactly what this counterintelligence special agent of 22 years is trying to articulate to the 6th highest ranking person in the United States government. And he does so pretty bluntly and unapologetically. Despite overwhelming evidence at both the unclassified and classified levels, certain individuals in the department remain staunchly opposed to further research on what could be a tactical threat to our pilots, sailors, and soldiers, and perhaps even an existential threat to our national security. In many instances, there seemed to be a direct correlation the phenomena exhibit with respect to our nuclear and military capabilities. The department must take seriously the many accounts by the Navy and other services of unusual aerial systems interfering with military weapons platforms and displaying beyond next-generation capabilities. There remains a vital need to ascertain the capability and intent of these phenomena for the benefit of the armed forces and the nation. I humbly submit my resignation in hopes it will encourage you to ask the hard questions. Who else knows? What are their capabilities? And why aren't we spending more time and effort on this issue? He closes the letter by saying, "Rest assured, no matter where the path of life may lead me, I will always have the best interests of the department and the American people as my guiding principle. Luis D. Elizondo," ominously only titling himself as Director. 2 months later, in December of 2017, apparently unhappy with the response or lack thereof this received, Luis Elizondo would keep that vaguely threatening closing promise, introducing himself to the world. He'd do so on the front page of the New York Times, and he'd bring receipts.
That's not LNS though, is it? It's not. Well, if there's a good thing, it's rotated. Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. The whole thing, dude.
Along with releasing 3 videos of unidentified craft being tracked by United States Navy fighter pilots, he would also expose the existence of the department in which he headed, ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which had been secretly operating from within the Pentagon since 2007. It turns out that this isn't just a Pentagon official talking about the most advanced military on the planet engaging with UFOs that outperform our frontline defenses and meddle with our nuclear weapons, but this is the Pentagon official on such matters. Lou was the guy inside of the headquarters of the United States military who was tasked with investigating and identifying anything operating within the skies that can't be accounted for, either domestically above the United States itself or over our military installations around the world. Unidentified craft operating within the United States or anywhere near our military assets is an occurrence which many would assume to be rare, and quickly identifying such crafts when they do occur is a task that many would assume, if not simply hope, wouldn't be very difficult for our intelligence and military agencies, especially in a post-9/11 America. Yet here's the man who is specifically tasked with doing so, informing the head of the United States Armed Forces that after 10 consecutive years involved with this program, his consensus is that unidentifiable aircraft, or to use his words, unusual aerial systems with unknown origin and intent, have and continue to pose a threat to the United States, our nuclear arsenal, our military assets, and our national security. He's saying that his superiors are ignoring this issue at the expense of national security, that himself, as well as many of our servicemen and women who have engaged with these objects, are concerned about this issue and not being taken seriously. And so out of frustration regarding these circumstances, he's quitting his job with the hope that by doing so it will force attention and action in the direction of determining what these things are, where they come from, what they are capable of, what they are doing, and why it isn't being addressed. In the 5 years following this initial New York Times article in 2017, Lou, along with an ever-growing group of military and government whistleblowers from around the world, have continued to elaborate more on this issue, revealing information that is just as unbelievable as it is apparently undeniable and unavoidable. Not the least of which being that these objects defy the laws of physics and aerodynamics as we currently understand them, including breaking the sound barrier with no sonic boom, possessing transmedium capabilities, meaning they've been observed operating in the air, the ocean, as well as space. They have no detectable means of propulsion, no heat signatures, exhaust fumes, anything of that sort. And they perform astonishing feats such as perfectly executed sharp angle turns, as well as reversing directions at supersonic speeds, and both ascending and descending thousands of vertical miles in a matter of seconds, if not split seconds. And they don't know who or what it is. As if these details aren't eyebrow-raising enough, the simple confirmation of the existence of a Pentagon-backed program dedicated to investigating UFOs in modern times was itself a bombshell, with the last publicly acknowledged government or military-funded program to do so being publicly terminated 54 years ago. That project, which would come to be known as Project Blue Book, was launched and led by the United States Air Force in response to multiple strings of UFO sightings and activity all over the country, and it would operate for 21 years. The strange saga of Project Blue Book oddly enough begins in 1952, with a young up-and-coming Hollywood actress who was in the midst of a controversy that was threatening her budding career. She was a 26-year-old blonde bombshell, a model on the cusp of fulfilling her aspirations of transitioning into an actress. Her small role performances in multiple films, successful modeling career, public persona, and newly kindled relationship with New York Yankees superstar Joe DiMaggio had recently been getting her a lot of attention in the press, the public, and the industry. With this newfound attention, however, came the speculation that she shared a striking resemblance with a nude model featured in a John Bamgart company calendar. These rumors were growing more rampant, so much so that the 1949 calendar in question was in high demand and being reprinted 3 years later. The PR department at Fox Studios, who she was contracted with, was made aware of this on March 1st of 1952, and fear was growing internally that their fast-rising it girl, and by relation the studio, were both about to be engulfed in the flames of shame and scandal. This was a very different time in American culture, decades before Kim Kardashian, and even before Playboy magazine was launched. As author Donald Spoto put it, no American movie star had ever been proven to have done anything comparable, although there were the usual rumors. Since the introduction of censorship, the studios had been forced by moral watchdogs acting with the hearty approval of the government to deny stardom to anyone who threatened the nation's purity with something as wicked as posing nude for a photo. They took a magnifying glass to scripts and finished prints, excising from movies any visual or verbal implication of human activities typically conducted in bedrooms and bathrooms. Even the screen time for a kiss was regulated, and married couples never shared the same bed. Unmarried couples, of course, did not exist. It was, in other words, an era of false angelicism and dangerous repression. Of such astonishing cultural schizophrenia, not to say moral hypocrisies, was American life in the 1950s. Fox was in full-blown crisis mode. They summoned the actress to the office, showed her the photos, and demanded to know if the rumors were true. She responded without hesitation, "Yes, although I really thought they didn't capture my best angle." Shocked and appalled, studio executives encouraged her to publicly deny the accusations that she was indeed the nude model, but she had a different idea. 1 week later, in an interview with Alan Mosby of the United Press International, she would say, "A few years ago, when I had no money for food or rent, a photographer I knew asked me to pose nude for an art calendar. His wife was there, they were both so nice, and I earned $50 that I needed very bad. That wasn't a terrible thing to do, was it? I never thought anybody would recognize me, and now they'll say it'll ruin my career. They want me to deny that it's me, but I can't lie. What shall I do?" This honest and unembarrassed approach to the situation instantly won the public over. She was not only granted forgiveness, but it would also secure her blooming legacy. Because of how she handled it, the would-be scandal had the opposite expected effects, not only for the success of her and for Fox Studios, but it would also prove to be a fundamental shift in American culture as well. For this grunge to grace fiasco, by the end of the month, she would be awarded with her debut cover shoot on the April 1953 edition of Life magazine, titled Marilyn Monroe, The Talk of Hollywood. In true Monroe fashion, she graced the cover with her trademark mixture of purity and seduction. Inside the magazine, she followed this up with a tantalizing series of photos where she showcased how to get a job, expertly, as she always did, playing jump rope with the line between sexiness and innocence. The accompanying article is pretty lackluster, but overall, it's a look into the origins of someone who would become a timeless icon during a phase that could have ruined her career. Instead, it cemented her legacy in the minds and the hearts of the American psyche, and it turned out to just be the beginning of her success and the catalyst of her cultural influence and impact. Flipping through the rest of the issue, you can really get a sense of the times. Yes, of course, there's the predictable Americana advertisements for beer, coffee, and Fords, along with the looming and gloating presence of the US military's self-praising and propagandizing, as well as an interesting advert for Lockheed Martin. This was, after all, a post-Depression era in American history, with World War II only having ended 7 years ago and the effects of which still lingering and present. The San Francisco Peace Treaty between Japan and the Allied powers wouldn't even be signed until later this month. Regardless, you can really feel an era of change beginning. It's an America that seems to be taking its first deep breath in a while. An America which was the newly solidified and seemingly unchallengeable leader of the free world, secured by its undeniable military superiority, which was clearly demonstrated in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. America, it seems, is taking its first steps into an era of scientific, industrial, and cultural renaissance and growth. It feels refreshing, and it only seems fitting that the face of that be Marilyn Monroe, shattering societal norms and stigmas and ushering in a new way of thinking, doing so with beauty and grace that you can't help but get mesmerized by. So mesmerized, in fact, that you may have completely missed the only other thing that is mentioned on that cover page. An intriguing caption in the upper right-hand corner which simply states, "There is a case for interplanetary saucers." Now, I think it's fair to conclude that a sensationalized caption like that wouldn't be needed to draw attention with Marilyn Monroe donning the cover, especially considering the circumstances at the time. Life magazine isn't particularly known for being tabloidy or unreliable, and it doesn't go unnoticed that this tactic of mix-matching headlines doesn't really seem to be a trait that's incorporated into Life's trademark minimalistic covers on any other issues, either before or after this one. So perhaps the editors had the opposite intention with this decision. instead utilizing Maryland to draw attention to this issue. It would make sense why this statement, which with no other context, relevance, or explanation, is quite literally the only other thing on the cover. It's a hypothesis that is further justified once you get to page 80, where an expose titled, "Have We Visited Us from Space?" begins its astonishing 18-page run, that being more so than any other story in the issue is dedicated. Topics which could have easily been granted this much detail and attention and are certainly worth it include Elizabeth II's coronation as the Queen of England following the death of her father, which gets no mention in this issue, President Harry Truman announcing that he will not be running for a second presidential term, which receives a measly 2-page write-up, and even the magazine's very own cover story, Marilyn, only receives 4 pages that are dedicated to her squabbles about being portrayed as a dumb blonde, her thoughts on men, and a single paragraph summarizing her life story, which honestly reads more like an obituary, written as a mere formality by an estranged sibling. Not only are all these other articles dwarfed in comparison to this one, but this one also wastes no time in getting straight to the point. Last week, the United States Air Force made known to life the following facts. 1. As a result of continuing flying saucer reports, the Air Force maintains constant intelligence investigations and studies of unidentified aerial objects. 2. A policy of positive action has been adopted to find out, as soon as possible, what is responsible for observations that have been made. As part of this study, military aircraft are alerted to attempt interception, and radar and photographic equipment will be used in an attempt to obtain factual data. If opportunity offers, attempts will be made to recover such unidentified objects. 3. Already, all operational units of the Air Force have been alerted to report in detail any sightings of unidentified aerial objects. Other groups, including scientists, private and commercial pilots, weather observers, all trained observers who work in any way concerns the sky or what happens in it, are urged to make immediate reports to the Air Force Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base of any unidentified aerial objects they sight. 4. Further, for the first time, the Air Force invites all citizens to report their sightings to the nearest Air Force installation. All reports will be given expert consideration, and those of special interest will be thoroughly investigated. The identity of those making such reports will be kept in confidence, and nobody will be ridiculed for making one. 5. There is no reason as yet to believe that any of the aerial phenomena commonly described as flying saucers are caused by a foreign power or constitute a clear and present danger to the United States or its citizens. These disclosures, sharply amending past Air Force policy, climaxed a review by Life with Air Force officials of all known facts in the case. This review has resulted from more than a year of sifting through and weighing all reports of unexplained aerial phenomena, from the so-called flying saucers to the mysterious green fireballs so often cited in the Southwest. This inquiry has included scrutiny of hundreds of reported sightings, interviews with eyewitnesses across the country, and careful reviews of the facts with some of the world's best physicists, astronomers, and experts on guided missiles. For the first time, the Air Force, while in no way identifying itself with any particular conclusions, has opened its files for study. Out of this exhaustive inquiry, these propositions seem firmly shaped by the evidence. Disks, cylinders, and similar objects of geometrical form, luminous quality, and solid nature for several years have been, and may be now, actually present in the atmosphere of the Earth. 2. Globes of green fire, of a brightness more intense than the full moons, have frequently passed through the skies. These objects cannot be explained by present science as natural phenomena, but solely as artificial devices created and operated by a high intelligence. No power plant known or projected on Earth could account for the performances of these devices. These incredible statements being made publicly by the United States Air Force came just 5 years after what is considered to be the beginning of the modern history of UFOs. The origins of this modern history are apparently, not so coincidentally it seems, the further you research, parallel to the development, testing, and deployment of nuclear weapons, as well as playing an interesting overall role in the history of World War II. Destruction by man's own mad science wasn't enough to chill the spine of the common citizen, then the threat of a more fantastic science than anything mad earthly scientists could conjure could easily cause paralysis. Patrick Luciano. Reports of strange happenings and encounters during World War II could itself be dedicated in an entire video series, with many extraordinary events involving glowing orbs, fleets of metallic wingless ships, and saucer-like objects performing incredible things with seemingly no explanation, which plagued the militaries around the world throughout the 7 years of the global conflict. Although admittedly, the Second World War was perhaps the most notorious era of secrecy, paranoia, experimental craft, and weaponry development, the fact remains that many incredible events took place during this time that are still to this day unexplained and unexplainable. Nicknamed the Foo Fighters, military pilots all over the world and from both sides of the war would regularly report engaging with fiery, glowing red, white, and orange apparitions that flew in formation and behaved as if they were under intelligent control. They were often noted to just be seemingly observing the events of the war from afar, but they would occasionally toy with the military aircraft, without a doubt proving to be a taunting presence for the military intelligence sectors as well as the soldiers on the ground and in the air. These events throughout the war wouldn't come to the general public's attention until June 24, 1947, when Kenneth Arnold, a civilian pilot, saw 9 saucer-like things flying like geese in a diagonal chain-like line. He'd tell this story to his local newspaper, coining the term flying saucers. 2 weeks later, the infamous events in Roswell, New Mexico would transpire. And with that, a full-blown public and media frenzy was now in full effect, and the modern UFO era had begun, as reports skyrocketed of sightings of chromium hubcaps, flying washtubs, and whirling donuts. It was easy to dismiss many of these as hysteria, or people taking advantage of the potential for publicity. Some, though, couldn't be. In the 4 years following Kenneth Arnold's initial sighting in 1947, a series of unbelievable and unexplainable events would start to transpire, and this would intrigue, terrify, and inspire the world. These occurrences, jarring though they must have been to the participants, left the official calm of the Air Force unruffled. The project set up to investigate the saucers, which was called Project Sign and known by the press as Project Saucer, seemed to have been fashioned more as sedative to public controversy than as a serious inquiry into the facts. On December 27, 1949, after 2 years of operation, Project Saucer wrote off all reports of unidentified aerial phenomena as hoaxes, hallucinations, or misinterpretations of familiar objects. That is, all but 34. These stubborn 34, seemingly unexplainable, were briskly dismissed as psychological aberrations. While these assurances appeased most of the press and pacified the public, some elements in the Air Force just about this time began to worry a bit more seriously. Saucer reports continued to come in at a rate of about 1 a day and were handled under the codename of Project Grudge. Officers at policy level began to show concern. The higher you go in the Air Force, conceded one intelligence officer, the more seriously they take the flying saucers. There was a good reason to take them serious. As a review of all records have shown, these years have produced literally dozens of incidents defying simple explanation and provoking the most incredible questions. There was a good reason to take them serious. As a review of all records have shown, these years have produced literally dozens of incidents defying simple explanation and provoking the most incredible questions. Life magazine ends the article with the following conclusions. What they are not and what they may be. They are not psychological phenomena. To doubt the observers in the foregoing cases is to doubt the ability of every human being to know a hawk from a handsaw. They are not the product of US research. Gordon Dean, chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, says, "There's nothing in our shop that could account for these things, and there's nothing going on that I know of that could explain them. US science has at its command no source of power that could put a flying machine through such paces as the saucers perform. They are not Russian development. It is inconceivable that the Russians would risk the loss of such a precious military weapon by flying a saucer over enemy territory. Nor is there any reason to believe that Russian science, even with German help, has moved beyond not only the practical, but the theoretical horizons of the United States' research. They are not distortions of the atmosphere resulting from atomic activity. They are not skyhook balloons." Once chief designer and research director at the German Rocket Center, now engaged on secret work for the US, Dr. Walther Riedel told Life, "I am completely convinced that they have an out-of-this-world basis. Operating under the observed conditions would make it impossible for any terrestrial structure to survive. They have done things that only a pilot could perform, but that no human pilot could stand. If it would be any known type of jet, rocket, piston, engine, or chain reaction motor, there would be a very clear trail at high altitude. It is from no power unit that we know of." Dr. Marcy A. Biot, one of the leading aerodynamics in the United States and a prominent mathematical physicist, says, "The least improbable explanation is that these things are artificial and controlled. My opinion for some time has been that they have an extraterrestrial origin." So who, what, and when? Before these awesome questions, science and mankind can only halt and wonder. Answers may come in a generation or tomorrow. Somewhere in the dark skies, there may be those who know. 3 months after this article was published in Life, the United States would become entranced with one of the most dramatic and undeniable series of events in UFO history, which would be dubbed the Invasion of Washington. Over the course of 2 weeks in July of 1952, United States military fighter jets were seen chasing and engaging fleets of UFOs all over the country, most notably through the restricted airspace above Washington, D.C. These sightings and engagements would be verified by multiple radar systems at both military bases and civilian airports. They would be confirmed by both military and civilian pilots, as well as droves of eyewitnesses, among them being some of the highest-ranking government and military officials, including President Harry Truman, who was understandably both concerned and curious about what was going on in the sky above his home, the White House, which is arguably the most secure and restricted airspace on the planet. Although the official timeline of events doesn't begin until July the 19th of 1952, there had been a string of bizarre happenings leading up to the events in Washington. The first documented report came in on July 10th, when the crew of a national airlines flight reported a light that was too bright to be a lighted balloon and too slow to be a big meteor, while flying near Quantico, Virginia, just south of Washington. 3 days later, July 13th, another airline crew would report seeing a light below their craft, 60 miles southeast of Washington. It came up to their level, hovered off to the left for several minutes, and then took off in a fast, steep climb when the pilot turned on his landing lights. The very next night, on July 14th, a Pan American flight crew reported seeing 8 UFOs near Newport News, Virginia, which is about 130 miles from Washington. 2 nights later, on July 16th, another sighting would be reported in the exact same area. However, this time it wouldn't come from a flight crew. It would be witnessed from the ground by 2 high-ranking civilian scientists from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics at Langley Air Force Base. Edward J. Ruppelt, who was the chief of the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book, would reflect in a report titled The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, which he wouldn't publish until a year later in 1953. A scientist from an agency that I can't name and I were talking about the buildup of reports along the east coast of the United States. We talked for about 2 hours, and I was ready to leave when he said that he had one last comment to make, a prediction. From his study of the UFO reports that he was getting from Air Force headquarters and from the discussions with his colleagues, he said that they thought we were sitting right on top of a big keg full of loaded flying saucers. Within the next few days, he told me, and I remember that he punctuated his slow, deliberate marks by hitting the desk with his fist. They're going to blow up, and you're going to have the granddaddy of all UFO sightings. The sighting will occur in either Washington or New York. Probably Washington, he predicted. The trend of the UFO reports that the scientist based his prediction on hadn't gone unnoticed. We on Project Blue Book had seen it, and so had the people in the Pentagon. We had all talked about it. This then was the big buildup to the first Washington national sighting, and the reason why my friend predicted that the Air Force was sitting on a big powder keg of loaded flying saucers. 3 nights after the Langley Air Force Base sighting, that prediction would be proven true, as on July 19, 1952, the invasion of Washington would officially begin. Ed Nugent is watching his radar scope alone in the air traffic control radar room at the Ronald Reagan National Airport in Arlington, Virginia, which is just a mere 5 miles and 15 minutes from the White House. His senior air traffic controller and 6 other colleagues are in the middle of a shift change. The air traffic is slow this evening, so they're not missing much. That is, until 11:40 p.m., when a group of 7 pale violet dots appear on Nugent's radar screen. They're not too far away from the airport and just a little bit south of Andrews Air Force Base, which is about a half hour away. Whatever these things are, they just appeared out of nowhere, and they're flying in a formation, relatively slow, about 100 to 130 miles an hour. No planes are scheduled to be in this area at this time, and certainly not 7 of them flying in a low-speed formation towards the nation's capital. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, 2 of them rapidly accelerated and disappeared off his radar screen. What was at first an oddity just became abnormal. He calls out for Harry G. Barnes, the head of Washington National Airport's air traffic controllers. "I got a fleet of flying saucers for you," he informs his boss with a nervous chuckle. Barnes didn't find anything humorous though. He immediately called for 2 more of his men to come take a look, and all of them agreed that this was not normal. "There must be a defect in the radar system," Barnes concludes. "If not, then we at least need to rule that out." He makes a call to his radar technician to come survey the equipment. Meanwhile, upstairs in the air traffic control room, operator Joe Zacco's attention is caught by a strange blip that is streaking across his radar screen. He looked out the window and made visual contact with a bright light hovering in the sky. Startled, he alerts his partner, Howard Coughlin. "Look at that bright light in the sky," he said. "If you believe in flying saucers, that could sure be one." Before Zacco can even finish his sentence and before Coughlin can even comprehend what is happening, the object, almost as if it was eavesdropping, took off and out of sight at an incredible speed. "Did you see that? What the hell was that?" Howard says. Around this time, back downstairs in the radar room, the technician determines that all of the equipment is working normally. Whatever those blips are, they're real. Barnes calls upstairs to the air traffic control tower, where he's informed that not only do Zacco and Coughlin have the same anomalies on their radar, but that they both just experienced visual confirmations from the tower. In a state of either disbelief or confusion, Barnes then calls Andrews Air Force Base, who reports that they too have unidentified targets on their scopes. Not only that, but all the details were consistent among the 3 separate radar rooms. 7 unidentified objects moving in formation at a slow speed towards Washington, D.C., with 2 of the objects disappearing at a rapid acceleration. Andrews Air Force Base informs Barnes that they clocked one of the objects zooming away at an astonishing 7,000 miles per hour. That's 5 times the speed of sound. This is a record that wouldn't be achieved by an American aircraft until the X-15, over a decade later. By this time, the objects had spanned out and were not only enclosing the entire range of the radars, but they were now operating within the restricted airspace over the White House and other protected areas of Washington, D.C. At this time, Barnes would make his first call for military interceptor jets to be scrambled, but they won't respond. So, These three separate groups of radar operators, air traffic controllers, and military personnel are now glued to their screens, stalking this cluster of unknown crafts as the crafts themselves stalk the city of Washington, D.C., and roam freely around the restricted airspace of the United States Capitol. It's shortly after midnight, and Joe Zacco contacts a Capital Airlines pilot that had just departed from the national airport. "Hey, keep a lookout for any unusual lights or anything," he directs him. Before they can even finish their initial interaction, and as soon as the pilot clears the airport's vicinity, he saw it. "There it is," he yelled. "There's one. It's off to the right. And there it goes." Zacco can't believe what he's hearing, let alone seeing. He watched as the object disappeared off his radar scope in real time as the pilot reported it zooming off and out of sight in the air. Over the next 14 minutes, that same pilot would report seeing 6 more identical lights. 2 hours later, another pilot contacted Zacco, this time an incoming flight to National. There's a light following me at the 8 o'clock level," he announces. Zacco checked his radar scope, and sure enough, one of the unidentified targets could be seen right behind and to the left of the aircraft. He confirmed this with the radar room downstairs, who also not only had the airline, but the blip trailing behind it. The UFO stayed with the aircraft until it was 4 miles from touching down on the National Airport's runway. Astonished, both Zacco and Coughlin's teams confirmed the pilot's incoming reports that the object is leaving him on their separate radar scopes. Barnes will again make a call for jets to be scrambled, but again, they won't respond. The evening's climax came in the early morning hours, when Barnes contacted Andrews Air Force Base to inform them that he was now picking up a target just south of their tower, directly over the base's radio range station. The Andrews crew looked outside and reported a huge, fiery orange sphere that was hovering in the sky directly over their station. Barnes will now put in his third call for fighter jets to be scrambled. Finally, this time, they will respond, but now it's almost daylight, and the F-94 jets are circling DC, but their patrols will turn up empty, and they will eventually return to their bases. And with that, the invasion of Washington is over, or at least the first phase of it is over. There would still be more excitement to come, but first, everyone had to play catch-up from the night before. You see, it turns out that nobody involved, including the crew at Andrews Air Force Base, thought to clue in Air Force intelligence on unidentified flying objects engaging with civilian aircraft, flying in restricted airspaces, and messing around above military compounds. When Air Force intelligence officials were contacted in the morning by reporters looking for a statement regarding bizarre reports and headlines like "Interceptors chase flying saucers over Washington, D.C., they hadn't yet heard of these events from the night before. This would trigger yet another string of headlines from the press. Air Force refuses to talk. By the time that Edward J. Ruppelt, the chief of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's program dedicated to investigating UFOs, heard about it, it was 10 a.m. and he was learning about it from the front page of a newspaper. He immediately called Major Dewey Fornett, analysis officer for the United States Air Force at the Pentagon, but all Fornett could tell him was what he learned from the papers. "I've called the intelligence officer at Bolling Air Force Base. He's investigating and we'll have a preliminary report by noon." At this point, the Pentagon is in a frenzy. Albert Chop, Air Force press secretary, is downstairs fighting off the press, while officials, intelligence officers, and other personnel of all sorts are stuttering their way through closed-door meetings 4 floors up. It was suggested that temperature inversions could be the culprit for the targets. This was quickly shot down though, as everyone agreed that a good radar operator knows the difference between an inversion-caused blip and an unidentified target. Not to mention, targets caused by temperature inversions aren't rare. These men had undoubtedly encountered them before, as well as every other imaginable scenario, both real and fake, that their equipment could produce. These weren't rookies after all. These were air traffic controllers and radar operators at Washington, D.C.'s National Airport. Even the most inexperienced of this group of people involved were still entrusted with matters of national security and the lives of literally thousands of people every day, both of which were dependent on their ability to differentiate and identify blips on their radars. These men were adamant. These targets were caused by radar waves bouncing off hard, solid objects. The Air Force trained and certified radar operators at both Andrews and Bolling Air Force Base backed up this consensus, as did 2 veteran airline pilots who had visual confirmation of these objects in the same places at the same times, doing the same things as they were observed doing on 3 separate radar systems. While not only trying to comprehend and assess the threat itself, the press, the public, and members of Congress all wanted answers, and Pentagon officials found themselves at a loss. Why don't we just tell them that we don't know? Some pondered. Others wanted to complete a proper investigation before saying anything. After a day of only frantic conversations and confusion, void of any real action from the United States military and intelligence officials, at 4:00 p.m., Edward Ruppelt would make the decision that they weren't going to speak at all, only giving the starving press and public a cold and stern no comment. He now had the added dilemma of a tidal wave of UFO reports flooding in from all over the country. Many of them were even more extraordinary and alarming than the ones in Washington the night before. Similar red lights like those seen over the Capitol had been observed at the long-range proving ground at Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. At Los Alamos Air Force Base and in Massachusetts, interceptors had chased UFOs, and in both cases, the UFOs had successfully evaded the military jets. In New Jersey and Massachusetts, F-94s tried unsuccessfully to intercept unidentified lights that were reported by the ground observers. And in both cases, the apparitions of light were said to have taken violent, evasive maneuvers. After considering all these reports, both Bauer and Ruppelt decided that, for the time being, the Washington sightings from the standpoint of national security were the most important, so that's where they focused all their attention. But they basically came up with nothing. It seems to just be an unexplainable event, a one-off, that everyone in the Pentagon just hoped the press and the public would forget about, although they would not. These hopes wouldn't last long though. 1 week later, almost to the hour, on July 26, 1952, it would happen again. Around 8:15 p.m., a crew of a National Airlines flight heading into Washington noticed some lights above their plane. It didn't take long to confirm that, once again, both the radar control room and the air traffic control tower at Washington's National Airport, as well as the radar operators at Andrews Air Force Base, were all separately tracking another group of unknown targets on their radar scopes. This time, the mysterious craft, if that's even what they were spread out in an arc formation around Washington. Just over an hour after the pilot and his crew made the first report into Washington, all 3 separate radar centers would be individually detecting and tracking unknown objects in every sector of Washington, D.C. At times, these objects traveled slowly. At other times, they reversed direction and moved across the radar scope at speeds calculated up to 7,000 miles an hour. By 10 p.m., Ruppelt would receive a call from Bob Ginna, a reporter at Life magazine. Ginna had been tipped off that events almost identical to the ones from a week prior were seemingly starting up again, and he wanted to comment on what the Air Force was planning to do about it this time. Ruppelt, who was assumingly exhausted from the previous week, decided to avoid the ominous no comment and instead tell the truth. "I have no idea what the Air Force is doing. In all probability, it's doing nothing," he responded. He then hung up and called an intelligence officer at the Pentagon who confirmed his suspicions. Nobody in intelligence had yet heard about any sightings. It wouldn't take long for word to spread though, and this time, the unidentified flying objects would have a very attentive and official audience. United States Air Force Master Sergeant Charles E. Cumming would report visually confirming the objects above Andrews Air Force Base. Albert Chopp, Major Dewey Fournette, and Lieutenant Holcomb, who was a Navy electronics specialist assigned to the Air Force's Director of Intelligence, were all on the scene and witnessing the events unfold in the radar room in first person. The nation's media had also assembled in droves by this point. Now approaching midnight, a call is made for interceptor jets to be deployed, all civilian air traffic is diverted out of Washington, and an order is made for the reporters and photographers to clear the radar room at Washington's National Airport. The reason given being that classified procedures were now going to go into effect as a fleet of F-94 Air Force fighter jets were screeching towards Washington, D.C. to defend the United States Capitol against an unknown threat. Ruppelt would say in his 1953 report that the real reason that the press was ordered to leave and the airways were cleared was because not a few people in that radar room were positive that this night would be the big night in UFO history. The night when a pilot would close in on and get a good look at a UFO, and we didn't want the press in on it. But just as the jets arrived, the objects disappeared. That was only until a few minutes after the F-94s were out of the Washington area. Once they were, the objects would reappear. What nobody in the radar room knew at that time is that when the objects disappeared from radars in Washington, calls would start to pour in from the locals near Langley Air Force Base by people who were reporting weird bright lights that were rotating in alternating colors. This was confirmed visually by the operators at Langley's Air Force Control Tower, and they now too called for interceptors to respond. The jets arrived at Langley, an F-94 pilot reported seeing the light and started towards it, but suddenly it went out, he says, like somebody turning off a light bulb. As all of this was going on, the same atmospheric phenomenon which had been scapegoated as the cause of the events in the week prior were simultaneously occurring as well. Not only were these targets caused by temperature inversions a common occurrence in Washington, but in comparison to the other targets, nobody was even paying them any attention. These were clearly different things. According to Major Dewey Fournette, everybody in that radar room was convinced that these targets were probably caused by solid metallic objects, and this something solid could both poke along at 100 miles an hour or outdistance a jet. The next day was one of confusion, Edward Ruppelt recounts in his 1953 report. After the first Washington sighting, the prevailing air on the Pentagon's fourth floor could be described as excitement, but this day, it was one of confusion. To make matters worse for Ruppelt, at 10 a.m. he receives a call from General Laundrie, Air Force aide to President Truman, at Truman's request. The president wants to know what the hell is going on. Look, it could have been caused by weather, but we have no proof, Ruppelt simply said, as there wasn't much else to say. By this point, hysteria around the country was reaching a boiling point, and new UFO reports were flooding in every hour. A California F-94 pilot reported that the night before, as all of this was going on in Washington, he was playing a game of cat and mouse with a large yellowish-orange light for several minutes on the opposite coast. This was confirmed by both ground radars and the aircraft sensors, which locked onto the object several times. Once he would get within range of the UFO, it would suddenly pull away at a terrifying speed, only to slow down a minute or two later, allowing the F-94 to catch up with it again. The pilot would tell Ruppelt, "I didn't like it. I felt like at any moment the cat was going to pounce." We kept them quiet, mainly because we weren't able to investigate them right away, or even confirm the facts. We wanted to confirm the facts because some of the reports, even though they were coming from military sources, were just too difficult to believe. Before these incidents above Washington and around the country over the course of 2 separate weeks in July of 1952, very few UFO sightings had been confirmed with both radar as well as being seen visually by credible witnesses. Now, people were seeing the same targets that the radars were picking up, and not only in Washington, but all over and all at once. In response to all of this happening all over the country, the acting director of Air Force Intelligence at the time, General John A. held a press conference. It would end up being the largest and longest United States military press conference since World War II.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve. Our basic difficulty in dealing with these is that there is no measurement of them that makes it possible for us to put them in any pattern that would be profitable for a deliberate, custom sort of analysis to take the next step. We have, as of date, come to only one firm conclusion with respect to this remaining percentage, and that is that it does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate with to any conceivable threat to the United States. Is that... We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
Hello.
Hi.
With the recent release of Pentagon footage of unidentified aerial phenomena and things like Project Blue Book and ATIP and all of these various things, in your former position and currently with the current information that's released, what's your viewpoint on what these objects that seem to defy all laws of physics are?
Well, first of all, that's a legitimate question now. And the short answer, but not the most meaningful one, is I don't know about this. But when I was president and I had a chief of staff, John Podesta, who loved science fiction, we made every attempt to find out everything about Roswell. And we also sent people to Area 51 to make sure there were no aliens in a deep because Area 51 is very important.
Who do you send to Area 51?
Oh, if I told you that. No, actually, I sent my Sandy Berger, who passed away sadly a couple of years ago, who's my national security advisor, but I said, we got to find out how we're going to deal with this, because that's where we do a lot of our invisibility research in terms of technology. Like, how do we fly airplanes that aren't picked up by radar and all that? So that's why they're so secretive, but there's no aliens, as I know. On the other hand, Hillary and I went to Hawaii in 2018 to the Big Island where all the telescopes are on top of the mountain, including the Keck telescope, the largest in the world. And several countries have scientific teams there. So after we toured the telescope, we went down and met with them. And I said, do you guys argue about the likelihood of life in outer space? He said, we have huge arguments. I said, you do? He said, oh, huge. I said, what's the range? He said, there are those of us who think it's 85% likely and those of us who think it's 95%. He said, these are people who spend their lives doing this. He said, we think, in other words, it's very unlikely that there is not life. There are not a billion planets, a billion solar-like systems. There are lots of mysteries out there, which is why I think we should take good care of this planet. I think we ought to kind of hang on to it if we can. And I think, but I also think it should keep us humble. There's a lot of stuff we don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Bill Clinton. We'll be right back, everybody.
Thank you.
Did you ever ask for information? They said, we can't tell you.
No, but I will tell you that there were times where I asked for information that it came slower than I wanted.
Did you ever, when you get in there, just say, like, get me the Declaration of Independence, some lemon juice, and a blow dryer? We're going to Nicolas Cage this boy. We're going to find a treasure map on the back.
There are times where prying information out of the bowels of an agency can be challenging.
UFOs? Any UFOs? Did you ask about that?
Certainly asked about it.
And?
Can't tell you. Sorry.
Okay. All right, I'll take that as a yes. Because if there were none,
Why
you'd say
not?
there was none, right? You just played your hand. I thought you were a poker player. You just 100% showed your river card.
Feel free to think that.
I do. I do. That's so much. That makes me happy to think
Can I
that you
just
won't
say-
tell me about
Can
UFOs.
I say it used to be that UFOs was what is it, Roswell was the biggest conspiracy?
Yeah.
And now that seems so tame, right?
Right.
The idea that the government might have an alien spaceship. That's
now the
nothing.
biggest conspiracy is people in Michigan vote.
The only thing I really want to know. I want to know what's going on. Would you ever open up Roswell and let us know what's really going on there?
So many people ask me that question.
I know, it sounds almost ridiculous,
No,
but it's actually the real question I
It
want
sounds
to know.
like a cute question, but it's actually, there are millions and millions of people that want to go there, that want to see it. I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting. But Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
So you're saying you may declassify?
Oh.
You'll take it?
Well, I'll have to think about that one. I'll have to think.
Now, if you become president, are you really going to tell the truth about UFOs?
I
I'm
am.
a big extraterrestrial.
Are you a big guy?
Huge. I saw a flying saucer when I was in third.
He actually got
In
attacked.
South Carolina?
In South Carolina.
And he has some marks on his shins from them.
I think I've been abducted a few times. But are you going to tell the truth about aliens? We're not going to the White House now, thanks.
No.
She promised
I
me.
did. Oh, yeah. No, these are two separate issues. You definitely are coming. I have said I want to open the files as much as we can. I mean, if there's some huge national security thing and I can't get agreement to open them, I won't. But I do want to open them because I'm interested.
Do you believe?
I don't know. I want to see what the information shows, right? But there are enough stories out there that I don't think everybody is just sitting, in their kitchen making them up. I think that people see things. What they see, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we've got to try to, give people information. I believe in
Bill
it.
Clinton, James Patterson. All right, President Clinton, first things first before we move on. UFOs. You've been the president. You've seen all the info. Are they real?
They've given us an idea for our next book.
Well, what do you know? What can you tell us?
The truth is that we've never proved one, but there are things flying around up there that we haven't fully identified yet. And keep in mind, there are basically 1 billion galaxies in an ever-expanding universe. I mean, you can't even get your mind around the sheer number of things that are out there.
But you've seen this.
And
You've seen the data.
well, no one knows, but I think that the probability is that there's something you would call life somewhere else.
All right, and this is the.
See,
This might not
this
help
is,
us, right?
now
This is
listen,
book number 3.
Right, so this is jumping off
definitely
point
book number
for the third
3.
book. Breaking news.
Yeah.
You're a Rhodes Scholar. You know what's up there. What is it? Tell us right now. What is? Do we need to protect ourselves? Should we be buying duct tape or anything?
No.
We need to
Because that
protect
seems to always-
ourselves from ourselves.
No, yeah.
Just grab your
We need
ear
to
for
worry
unsafe.
about. We need to worry about what Jim said. We need to get better at home.
Yes, right. No,
In our earthly home and in our American home.
Reggie, do you have a question for our guest this evening?
Oh boy, you betcha.
Imagine if you said no. Imagine,
Yeah.
do you know what?
No, I'm good.
Do you know what? I'm gonna skip it tonight.
No, yeah, I have a question today. It goes to, let's make it for President Obama, since he's here. All this talk about dem aliens with the you know, what are they, UAFs or whatever they call them, you know, all the footage and everyone talking about it. It's like, what is your, like, I know that doesn't necessarily mean aliens, it is just a UAF, but I was wondering if you have a theory about that.
Well, when it comes to aliens, there's some things I just can't tell you on air.
But you'll tell us off air? Great.
You know, no, look. The truth is that when I came into office, I asked, right? I was like, all right, you know, is there the lab somewhere where we're keeping the alien specimens in spaceship? You know, they did a little bit of research, and the answer was no. But what is true, and I'm actually being serious here, is that there's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they moved, their trajectory. They did not have an easily explainable pattern. And so, you know, I think that people still take seriously trying to investigate and figure out what that is. But I have nothing to report to you today.
Okay.
Unless, like, see, here's the question. Reggie might secretly be an alien, right? You remember in Men in Black? And so when he asks all these questions, he's deflecting. Think about it.
You are not the first person to have this thought.
Do we know what he looks like behind those glasses, right? I mean, his eyes might blink in the wrong direction. So that's a question that everybody can think about at this time.
Major Keyhole, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, what is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. World. the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? After the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? After the end of the world. After the